But I'm excited to hear your journey, because I don't think I've fully heard your story. So
Okay.
yeah. Right. Thank you, Jake. So as usual, for everybody who is listening at home, if you have questions, you're more than welcome to pop them in the group chat as we go along. And then also at some point we'll come to inviting people on live if they want to join the conversation. So if anybody has a question, then yeah, you're welcome to come on face to face as well. But as you're all aware, if you've joined us before, we're just keeping ourselves on mute so that we can all hear Jason share. And yeah, if you've got any questions, just drop them in the box, or you can raise your hand later on in the conversation as well. But I'll just start to explain a little bit about the inspiration behind the summit, I guess, because we're talking a little bit, hopefully, about creativity today. And I guess the summit kind of just evolved from just a thought that came in, all about self-rediscovery, because that's what it felt my journey had been about, really. It was kind of like, really, through the principles, you know, a lot of people come to self-rediscovery, and myself included, thinking that we're trying to fix or change something in the external. And I very much began to see that that wasn't the case. It was kind of like, well, we can play in being human and enjoy that, but from the foundation of seeing deeper about who we are, really, in our wisdom. And wisdom's just my label for kind of, you know, the natural intelligence behind life that's living us all the time. And we've kind of had loads of different speakers on, sharing their own journeys, and addiction, I think, isn't one that we've covered. So I'm excited to explore that as well, because that's a really interesting one. And yeah, and it's just nice to, although we're exploring the same wisdom in the different forms, it's nice to kind of have that sometimes, so that we can kind of, you know, understand it in different ways. We're live every Friday, and if there are any questions kind of as you're going along in the replay, then you're welcome to kind of reach out as well to me, and I will do my best to answer those. And I also jump on live in the Self-Rediscovery Summit Facebook group. So if you're not already in there, which I know many of you are, then feel free to hop in and join us, because there's a nice little community in there. But to just introduce who we have speaking this week, we have the wonderful Jason. And so I feel like this conversation is going to be inspiring and fun at the same time. So I met you, Jason, a couple of months back now, didn't I? When I came on your podcast, which I love. I love the name of. It's called Misunderstandings of the Mind. I'm sure people have come across it, but if they haven't, then check it out. And yeah, and you told me a little bit about your journey. But I also recently saw you posting in a group about creativity, and you posted something like, you know, it doesn't have to be effort, you know, it's not about effort, it's about kind of creating from fun and it just evolving, really. So I thought that kind of speaks to, you know, the part of this Self-Rediscovery Summit that talks about unraveling a life we love, because there's kind of, I see it in two parts. It's like we kind of find out the foundations of who we are and rediscover that, and for me then it was like, well, there's freedom in that from whatever we're suffering with or feeling stuck with, but then there's also this kind of like, well, actually, you know, now we know that how thought creates our reality, we can kind of use that to have fun with life. So so that kind of spoke to me about that. But to formally introduce you, I'm just going to read a little bit about you. So you're a certified transformative coach and certified psychotherapist at wildwidecoaching.com. You've been working with addictions and mental health for over 20 years in evolving ways. And after your own recovery started 25 years ago in 12 steps, you've been searching for something different, following the path to a degree in transactional analysis. 3 years ago, in a chance encounter, Jason found the work of Michael Neill, and after 3 days in LA and an exploration into the 3 principles as uncovered by Sydney Banks, which we've been exploring this entire time, life changed unrecognisably. And it's nice to hear these stories continuously, because it kind of shows what's possible, really. You've been teaching and sharing the 3 principles in your work with addictions ever since, but also you find delight in seeing that since this understanding about addiction, the rest of life has simply kind of unraveled, playing out into creativity. And you've talked about how there's so much happening in your life beyond anything that you kind of could have ever wished for, really. So yeah, that's that's what I got from you. But I think it's best to kind of just invite you to kind of share a little bit more about your own personal journey, because I know people love a personal journey. So that's normally how I start, with, you know, inviting you to share, yeah, about your own experience and what kind of led you to this point, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. It's always nice hearing someone else read it out, you know. I'm thinking, because it's even a little bit surreal, you know. Sometimes I think, wow, was that really me? You know, it's kind
Yeah.
of, did I really do a degree in transactional analysis? When you said that, I thought, oh, you know, it's kind of like, oh, it's the last thing I would want to do now, you know, even though it was part of my journey. But it was like, just the thought of it now is kind of like digging into my past for hours and hours and days on end, you know. Just seems like such a painful effort, full of experience, full of effort, that's really not a necessary part of recovery, you know.
Yeah.
um
And
I think all,
that's quite a profound thing to kind of say, really, isn't it? It's like, it's how we're conditioned in the world to think that recovery works.
it's profound. It's also very controversial, I guess, outside of this meeting, you know, because so many people make a living out of being therapists, you know. I feel qualified to speak from my own experience as a therapist, you know, that it's like, you know, someone said to me that all therapy is iatrogenic, you know, and at the time I didn't know the meaning of the word, and I'm not sure if everyone else will, but it means that it's kind of like it's the cause of other diseases, you know. And it's kind of like, and I sat with that for a while, because that was a profound moment for me. And I kind of thought, you know, when I had my experience of finding the three principles, I knew that very same day that I couldn't practice as a therapist anymore. You know, I knew that day. I didn't know what I could do, didn't know how I could help people, didn't have a clue what I would do instead, but I just knew. Like, I knew I couldn't take people into their past anymore to find a solution. And I hadn't read about George and Sid and all the experiences that he had as a psychologist, you know, like talking about being mental health professionals. I hadn't read about all the stuff. I hadn't heard about that, but I knew, you know, I knew that
Yeah.
I couldn't do that anymore.
Wow. At that point, did you kind of think, what am I going to do now?
Well, I was kind of pissed off because I just invested about 30 grand over 5 years in training as a therapist, you know, literally, you know, a few years prior. And I'd trained for 5 years and spent a lot of money. I'd also spent a lot of money being in therapy while I was training as a therapist, you know. And it's like, and I always had this story about money. So it was, it was initially like oh my God, I can't believe I've wasted so much money on something I can't even use. What am I going to do now? I can't afford to do any more training. It was kind of like one of those fleeting moments, you know, where everything looked different. But I was having all these quick realizations about areas of my life, you know, as I was having insights.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Sorry, I kind of jumped in there as I invited you to start sharing a story.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, oh, but that's juicy. Let's dive into that. So I'll let you carry on.
Yeah. I think the first thing I wanted to say about creativity was that, you know, there's the fun side of it when you see it and it makes sense. But like, you know, what was news to me, what was an insight for me was, you know, it was that we're creating at all times, you know, that we're all equally creative, that we're all made of the same creative energy, and we all use the same creative energy in different ways. And when someone put it to me, you know, early on, that addiction is a use of creation, you know, as a use of creativity, you know. It's kind of like we're just creating our experience in the moment, you know. And it's kind of like, it's the same energy, it's just used in a different way. I kind of thought, oh wow, yeah, it's kind of like, you know, that the energy is actual neutral, you know. I've kind of got caught up in my own personal experience, my own personal thinking, but I'm still using creativity. I'm creative in the way that I fund my habit for drugs, you know. I'm creative in the way that I commit crime to get money to get drugs, you know. It's kind of like, it's like I sit there, it's the same way, you know, now that I would kind of sit and think, oh my God, you know, things are disastrous, my life's terrible, what am I going to do now? And I would, I know, I can go and do this. And that this might have been commit a crime. It might have been go and manipulate someone for money, you know, to get drugs. But it's still in the same way that when I sit now and I get quiet, that something comes to me about what to do next, you know. I think that's the first big realization that I had about creativity, that it's not this inherited like source of something that's really rare and a few people get given in life, and that some people are really good at, and it's related to some artistic, musical, drawing type, talent that some people have and some people just don't have, and I spent a lifetime telling the story of being non-creative. I'm not creative. I'm technical, I'm scientific. I had a technical career. So it was like I spent a lifetime telling the story of I can't draw, I can't play music, I can't sing, can't do any of those things, because I just didn't understand creativity. It looked like something unexplainable that some people were born into and some people weren't, and that's the first thing that I want to say about creativity, because that was a massive realization for me, and what made a massive change.
I love that, because you're kind of like busting the myth of creativity there, which is kind of what you do in your podcast, Misunderstandings of the Mind, right? It's like, well, that was a misunderstanding about creativity.
Yeah. One of the first podcasts I did with Michael Neill about creativity was when I was having that experience, of kind of realizing that, how creative. I'll come back to this because I think it's important, and it's kind of like how my insights and how my life unfolded around creativity and the podcast as well, and how that came about. Going back to the start, it's kind of like that. When my dad was killed in an accident, and I have this vivid, one of my, perhaps even my first memory was of the police turning up at the door when I was a kid, and calling for my mum. And then I remember my mum lying on the floor, hysterical, kicking and screaming, and me being took away to the neighbor's house. And my dad had been killed in an accident. And, I don't have any, I went through life telling stories about that. That became my go-to thing. I was a victim, of that for many years. It was like my poor me story. It's like if anyone said to me, "Oh, well, what happened?" It's kind of like, so I'd go, "Oh," I'd tell this story of how bad it was for me. And and then in my later life as a therapist in recovery, I'd then be a proud survivor, a proud survivor of trauma, until the point when I found this understanding when I became free. And it was just something that happened, that was tragic and sad, but I'm not a survivor or a victim of that anymore. It doesn't exist anymore unless I want to think about it.
Wow. So both labels kind of got, blown out the water really with this understanding. It wasn't that you kind of then almost saw yourself in that empowered way, that even fell away as well. It was kind of like, well, it was an experience of life. That's kind of how I'm hearing it. Is that how you mean?
Yeah, exactly like that. I mean, it was like there's so much. I mean, we've talked about the personal development world before, but there's so much in that world about being a survivor. I'm a survivor. It's like something to be proud of and something you should shout about. And it's kind of like, but it didn't fit with me. It didn't. I kind of tried it on for a while, and it just, it was like one of those things that I had a deep sense of knowing that it wasn't right somehow. That it was kind of like, and when I had that realization that trauma is just an experience carried through time by thought, and relived in the moment by thought, that it was like that only when I had that realization did I become free of connecting everything that happened that felt like a reaction to trauma in the present, like to connecting it to the past. So I just stopped doing that. I just literally, as I had that realization, no longer anytime I went in a motor car, anytime I went on a tall building, or anytime I went near an edge where there was some risk, did I then think, oh, I'm feeling what I'm feeling because of what happened to me? It's kind of like, it just went away. I thought it used to come to me, I'm feeling what I'm feeling because I'm looking over the edge of a tall building. It's kind of like, rather than, I'm feeling what I'm feeling because I'm looking over the edge of a tall building. And what happens to me is that I remember my past, and that because of what happened in the past, I have an experience in my body, like being here. It just didn't look like that anymore. My view of it changed.
Yeah. So the story kind of fell away, the labels, because we so often label our experience, right? And that's kind of, how we navigate life, and we try and make sense of it until we see something new like this, and then we don't so much anymore.
Yeah.
But again, that's quite profound. It's quite
Well, that was a big
Some
insight.
people,
That was a big change for me, because even into this understanding at first, I mean, that was a later insight for me, because I still thought the experiences that I was having, getting on planes, going on in tall buildings, driving a car over a certain speed, you know, were all related to trauma, you know, all related to my dad being killed in an accident. But it just didn't ever occur to me that it was somehow brought into the moment by a thought. You know, it was something to do with something that was trapped inside of me or something like that. So it looked, because that's all the theory, and that's all the psychological theories. Trauma is trapped in the body, it's held in the cells, it changes your reactions to things, you know, and it's kind of like, and it's so funny that, like, I believed that to be true until I didn't. And when I didn't, it didn't happen anymore. You know, it's kind of like I just didn't have it. You know, I still have momentary physiological experiences, you know, when I'm in dangerous situations. But to me, that looks kind of quite normal now. Like that if you look over the edge of a cliff, you know, that you have a feeling that might not be a good idea to jump. You know, it's kind of like, that just kind of looks like a self-preservation thing rather than a response to trauma, you know?
yeah, because we're human and we have those instincts as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, like, you know, like going back to that, when that happened, when my dad got killed, you know, it's kind of like nobody knew what to do, you know, like innocently everyone did their best, you know, my family. My mum, she found work as an escape, you know, as a way of coping with her tragedy, you know, and kind of I found food as a way of coping with mine. And food addiction was my first addiction, so I kind of, completely unknowingly, there was no conscious experience, you know, it was just like that. I found comfort in food, you know, it felt like it. I look forward to it. I look forward to eating. I look forward to binging. I look forward to stealing what I could out of the cupboard and getting away with it. I look forward to the experience in my body that I got from food, you know. And I mean, that's creativity in itself, you know, creating a way to cope with an emotional experience. You know, as a child, it's like there's no thought process, you know, there's no conscious experiment or experience, you know, it's not like, oh, I'm going to do this and see if it makes me feel better. It's just a learned way of coping, you know. Children have this real clever way of finding ways to deal with their situations, regardless, you know, of how tragic they look from the outside or how difficult they look from the outside. You know, it's like, I was kind of left to my own devices. My mum had a business, you know, pretty much even at an early age. So, and even when she was there physically, you know, she wasn't there, you know, like there really. It's kind of like she was never there. And it was like, I just found a way to be okay in that, you know, and that was through my use of food.
Yeah, it's really interesting because our journeys are quite similar in that respect, in that when I was 17, actually, my dad bought me Slim Fast for my 17th birthday, which obviously looked really helpful to him, to me, when I was worried about my weight, because I had the same thing. I turned to food. But the stories that I then made about that and made it mean something, and tried to fix it and all of that sort of thing. Again, it's that kind of, I don't know whether it's a misuse of creativity, but it's definitely not a direction I should have or wanted to focus in. It would have made me feel good, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, it makes sense to me that, like, what I've understood from my work with Bill Pettit, you know, what I've understood is that, like, you know, if the system has a way of self-regulating, you know, like the same way the body will, if you cut your finger and you leave it, it will mend itself. You know, it's kind of like, then the system has a way of self-regulating. Now, you know, if I am caught up in my thinking, you know, like if you take the snow globe effect, you know, and I start judging myself and my thinking, and then I judge my judgment, and then I have more feelings, I have more of a physiological, and then I have more judgment of the experience. What happens is, at some point, you know, it's kind of like, unless I regulate that, you know, it's kind of like I'm going to have like what we might call a psychotic episode or even a breakdown, because it's just going to become too much. You know, the system goes into overload and shuts down. So addiction is just a learned way of coping with that. You know, it's kind of like, it's a learned way of regulating experience. And from that point of view, I mean, it's kind of like, that was my big realization, that addiction makes so much sense, that it's not a disease or a big thing that's inside of you that no one can explain. You know, it's just something that makes perfect sense, a way of coping, you know, a learned way of coping, of regulating the system, a learned way of dealing with the misunderstood use of thought, you know, like that we don't, that we sort of create our suffering and then, you know, use a substance or a process, you know, be gambling, sex, money, food, shopping, whatever it is, as a way of regulating our experience. Now, it makes sense, because if you just stopped or just didn't do that, then in some ways you would probably be worse off. You know, you'd be ended up having a form of mental breakdown or a psychotic episode, you know, because overthinking is the cause of all mental illness. So it's kind of like that. From that point of view, it makes perfect sense. Now, I didn't have any clue that that was what was going on at the time. You know, it's kind of like that was all a completely unconscious process.
Yeah.
So, and it just got worse, you know, like over the years, it was food first. And then it's like, as soon as I was old enough to go out, I mean, I was been writing my book recently, and it's like, you know, experiences of, I mean, there's quite a few stories, but like to put a couple of them that I put in my book, you know, one was like I was 10 years old, so it must have been 1980 something, you know. It's kind of like I stole £200. I used to get up early, and my mum had a safe, and I used to creep downstairs in the house and like find the key and lift up the floorboards and find this safe that had cash in it. She had a business. And I took this money out of the safe, and I went to school, and I went to this bike shop, and I bought a brand new BMX bike for £200, right? This was when I was 10 years old. The guy took the money off me, and I took this bike to my friends and all that. And then I got home with it, you know, and I said to my mum that, yeah, someone gave it to me. You know, it's kind of like my mum must have been stupid or something, like she didn't get it, you know. It's kind
That
of like,
was super creative though.
yeah, for sure. But like, I just wanted people to love me. You know? I just wanted to be liked. I wanted to be loved. I wanted people to think I was cool, you know, like everyone else. And it's like, because I felt so empty inside. I felt so disconnected from life and so separate. And then there's another story where I stole £500. I bought a motorbike, you know, and I went to school on a motorbike. I mean, that was when I got expelled from private school. It's like literally, you can picture that, like 7 a.m. I can't remember. I was 13. Stole a motorbike. I rode across golf courses and fields. I had a private school blazer on, you know, and a pair of glasses. So I wear glasses and no helmet, you know, and a rucksack on my back. And I'm riding at 7 o'clock in the morning across golf courses and down streets on a motorbike that I've stolen the money for. You know, like thinking I was completely invisible. Like I had absolutely no like regard or consideration for life, for people, for anything. I was just in my own world. I was completely lost, you know. I really was. I would have done anything to escape, you know, my experience of life, because it was just so painful for me. I mean, I was took to psychiatrists, put on antidepressants at the age of 9, you know, given mental health diagnoses. And my mum sent me to special schools and to different psychiatrists and different things, you know, all trying to find out what was wrong with me. But none of them addressed grief, you know. They just didn't understand that. I didn't understand it either. I didn't know until later life, where I look back at the records, and it didn't make any sense that no one really kind of, even in the records that I've got now, I've got them here now, like I applied for them from the doctors, but like, there's nothing in there that makes any sense, you know. It's just all about psychological diagnosis, you know, and no humanness in there, you know. So yeah, so I mean, from there, I mean, it just progressed into more crime and progressed into drugs. You know, that was just how it went. I would do anything to escape from life, and it just, taking drugs was just the next thing that made sense, you know. So because I'd already been involved in crime and taking drugs, that, you know, it made sense for me to commit crime, to take drugs, you know. So I got into organized crime, stealing cars and all sorts of anything really that we could for a group of people. Got paid in heroin, you know, as a young teenager. Stopped going to school, got kicked out of private school, stopped going to school. My mum kind of disowned me, kicked me out. You know, I lived on the streets. I lived in a caravan. I lived in the back of a car. I lived in God knows, like on people's sofas if I could, you know. But most of those years, I lived in an old caravan around the back of my mum's house. I wasn't allowed in the house. That was it. You know, she got me this old caravan. It had electric, and that was it. You know, and most of that time was spent taking drugs, committing crime, going to jail, and being in and out of jail. And yeah, it was pretty grim. You know, it was kind of like I had no clue. You know, it was like life was, looking back, that's a very surreal thing to think that that was me that was living that way, you know, because it's like my life is so cool now. But it was like, when I look back at that, you know, it was so real. I mean, some of the situations I got myself into, some of the, I mean, they weren't murders, but like they were like severe beatings that people got in jail while I was there, you know, like horrific memories that I've still got in my mind that I just wouldn't want to repeat or see or hear from again, you know. And and just, I mean, that was just a horrible experience. And like being in, hanging out in blocks of high-rise flats trying to buy drugs, you know, from people that I'd never met before, and getting held up at gunpoint, being held up with a machete to my throat, you know, all sorts of crazy experiences just to get drugs. You know, it's like anything to escape from life. And you know, I got clean when I was 23. You know, it's kind of like I'd got to this point. I'd lived in a homeless hostel, and I remember that my it was funny because it was a homeless hostel where no one could have drugs or alcohol problems, and everyone had a drug and alcohol problem that was in there. You know, but it wasn't allowed. And it was my brother that came and said, you know, you need to do something about it. I don't know how it happened, but then the government wouldn't fund it. My mum had to pay some towards it, which I didn't think she would because we hadn't spoken for so long. I'd been in and out of jail so many times that they disowned me. So she agreed. I mean, they phoned her from the hospital and said, you need to supplement, you know, it's rehab. And she agreed. So I went into rehab. And that's when I got clean from drugs. I was 23 then, which was 26 years ago this year. But the thing about that was that, you know, I was willing to stop taking drugs because I was so frightened, you know, I like got so deep into that world that I wanted to get out of it. You know, some of the things I was doing for drugs, some of the people I was around, some of the brutalities that I saw, that I witnessed, that was part of, you know, it's kind of like I lived my life on edge, like really on edge, you know, all the time. And it was like, I just didn't want to live like that anymore. So stopping taking drugs was appealing to me, you know, in a way. It was kind of like I didn't want to live that life. And so I got clean, and it's kind of like I went to 12-step meetings for a long time. But what happened was that my life got progressively worse. You know, it's kind of like I somewhat subscribed to a 12-step program, went to meetings, did regular recovery things, hung around with people who all didn't seem to be getting that much better. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, they stopped taking drugs and got out of jail. And that was the common bond between people. It was like, yeah, we all used to take drugs and now we hug and we love people and we go to meetings. And that was great. I mean, don't get me wrong. Those are some amazing people that I've met. But like still, I always felt kind of like there was something more for me. You know, I was always a seeker. I always knew there was something more than that. That's how I ended up training as a therapist and going to therapy. I think after about 10 years clean, I started thinking there's something just not right. And I started searching. I started going to events, to meditations, to silent retreats, to the Hoffman process. You know, I started trained as a counselor, then I trained as a therapist. And I always thought the reason I trained as a therapist, psychodynamic, because I thought that everything I was suffering from was because I hadn't looked at the trauma and loss of my dad, you know, and I wasn't willing to. And I thought, even though I'd found this 12-step program in recovery, that I wasn't really willing to do it. And that's why I was still suffering. So it's almost like it required willingness for me, you know, like, or understanding or something for me to do, you know, in order for it to work. And I was resistant to it. That's kind of how it looked to me at the time. And I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to look at it. You know, it's kind of like, because there's something in me, I guess even to this day, you know, kind of thought that was not a good idea to do that, you know, to dig into it.
As you're talking about, it's kind of like wisdom was there all along. It kind of knew that wasn't the truth. It's like, there's something else. And even that whole journey really led you, I guess, to the point where you then did see something different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I trained as a therapist as well, it's kind of like what happened was that 2 years into training, I mean, having lived over, I mean, I know so many other things that happened in this town. I lived overseas for 10 years. You know, I've done all sorts of helping people with addiction, learn the foreign language, used to go in a detox, you know, and talk to people and do all sorts of stuff. But still my own sense of self, of who I was or what I was doing in the world wasn't there. You know, there wasn't any. And my own suffering, you know, my own acting out on addictions, doing anything but taking drugs, you know, was my life was pretty chaotic from that point of view. And when I went into therapy training a couple of years into that, I started suffering with an immense anxiety, you know, and it's kind of like, I remember getting to the airport and being gripped in the seat that I was in, thinking I can't get on the plane because we're going to end up in the sea, you know, and it's kind of like, and I had this real vivid imaginary video running in my head of what was going to happen, you know, I was kind of like in the sea, and I was having this physiological like sense of anxiety that was really overwhelming, and I ended up needing medication to get on a plane for a couple of years. And the thing was, like, even then at that time, something didn't add up, because I'd been flying long haul for many years and I'd never had any anxiety. I never connected the dots between going to therapy and digging into the past and looking at trauma and sitting week in, week out, processing this trauma, trying to desensitize myself to it as a therapist, and in therapy being the thing that caused the anxiety. I never connected that, you know.
It's interesting, because I think that, again, it's like for a long time, when I found freedom from suffering through the principles, I focused on sharing how I'd found freedom from suffering, and almost the more I was sharing how I'd found freedom from suffering, the more I was kind of suffering, because that was my focus. And it was like, oh, hang on a minute, there's something more to be seen here.
Yeah, it's true. It's it makes perfect sense now that digging into what I thought was trauma, and you know, created all sorts of anxieties and struggles, you know, like I went through a real dark depression in my third year of training as a therapist, like very, very dark, you know, close to suicide, you know, consistent suicidal thoughts, and really, really dark. You know, I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. The only thing that kept me alive was my daughter. You know, she was 3, and she was like the little bit of light in my life, you know, at the time. And it was kind of like, I just was in that place where I thought I couldn't do to her what happened to me. I couldn't leave her, you know. And it was like, that was one of the things that kept me going. And they were trying to put me on medication, you know, for depression. And at that point, I hadn't taken medication for 15 years, you know, and I kind of thought, you know, I just refused. I was just like, no, there's no way I'm taking medication. It's not the answer to this. You know, so I toughed it out, I guess, you know, and it's kind of like, so life that was pretty much, you know, I'm not going to go into any more details about that, because like, that was how it was. It was tough. It was difficult. It was always a struggle. You know, every day was a battle to get through. It was literally like that motto of one day at a time was like, you know, like really tough getting through that one day at a time, you know, even though that knowing it was one day at a time made it somewhat simpler. It wasn't an enjoyable experience. And I'd gone to Tony Robbins, because I was still on this searching thing. I'd booked into Tony Robbins Mastery University, and where you do all the events, because I thought, this is it, you know, this is the answer, you know, it's kind of like, this is what I've been missing. And I joined a group, and we were sharing resources, a WhatsApp group. We were sharing resources to help each other be more motivated, you know, so it was all motivational resources. They were all sharing the talks, like Grant Cardone, Les Brown, all that type of stuff, you know, Tony Robbins type, you know, get a trampoline, get up at 5 a.m., work 18 hours a day, you know, you can do it, blah, 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 you know, it's kind of like all that type of stuff. And I ended up, someone gave me a login to Hay House, and I was pirating a video. There was 3 videos in there. It was funny, because the 3 videos were Wayne Dyer, Paul McKenna, and Michael Neill, you know, and it was kind of like, and I looked at the Paul McKenna one, and it was How to Make You Thin, and I thought, I don't want to watch that, you know. And it was like, I watched the Wayne Dyer one, and that was cool. I've always liked Wayne Dyer. And the Michael Neill one, so I thought, I'm going to record the Michael Neill one. And I couldn't find a way to record it. And the only way I could record it was to watch it. So I had it playing here at the side of me while I was working. And every couple of minutes, I just found myself mesmerized by what this guy was saying. You know, I just kept like listening to it. And I don't know what I could hear. It's kind of like, but I just found myself going. I remember texting my friend going, there's something about what this guy Michael Neill's saying, you know, there's something about it. It's like resonating with me, or it's just like, it's really interesting because it's making sense to me in some way. And it was like,
I love that
and
you
that,
don't really know even what that was, because, you know, so
no,
often we think that we need to know what our insights are, but
yeah,
it's not the case. It's like we can hear something and it go in and just feel different.
absolutely. Yeah, there was no understanding whatsoever. It was no big insight. It wasn't no clarity. And even for a while after that, seeing that, things didn't change for me until, I was going to LA doing some other coaching training with another coach. And I looked on Michael's website and everything came back to me. And I thought, oh God, this guy's got an event on 2 days after I'm meant to be leaving LA. I'm going to change my flight. So I changed my flight and I reached out and I booked onto this event, and it wasn't cheap. It was $5,000, for that event. And it was like literally for 3 days. And I think one of the side effects, or, what people might know as analysis paralysis, of being a therapist or being a self-seeker, was that, like, I really thought I knew everything about change, and I had to analyze and filter and check everything for correct and factual information, so that was how I used to listen to people in life. And I remember getting to LA and going to this event, and kind of like being there and having my notebook out, and starting to ask questions. And in my mind, I was going 10 till 5 and it's 10 past 10. We haven't even started yet. I've got to get my money's worth here. How long do we get for lunch? That's only, well, if we do 2 hours in the morning and 1 hour in the afternoon, that's only 3 hours for $5,000 over 3 days. It's like, that's how my head worked, that it's kind of like, that's costing me like £800 an hour or so. Like, that's kind of where I was in my head, like trying to get my money's worth.
Yeah.
And I remember like saying something to Michael, and he got it straight away. And I remember that invitation, because it's what I give to a lot of my clients now, was that, can you just listen without trying to make sense out of this? Can you listen without filtering whether it's right or wrong, whether it's similar to something or whether it fits or doesn't fit? It's kind of, and without trying to remember it, or without trying to make value of it here and now. He asked me that, can you do that? And it was kind of like, and for some reason, whatever reason, I said okay, and I put the book down, and I sat there for 3 days, and I don't honestly know to this day what I heard. I didn't sort of record it, write it down, anything like that. I didn't have like big moments, but I knew that when I got there, I'd gone to LA because I wanted to make more money, have a better business, be a better coach, because I needed to, because I wasn't happy with the job that I had and wasn't happy with the relationship, and I needed to move on in life. I had all these ideas in my mind, and I sat there at the end of those 3 days of those intensive, and I've still got the picture. It's on my computer. I was on this little bench swing at the back of an Airbnb, and there's this beautiful valley out the back, and it was like it's like I just woke up out of a bad dream. I was sat looking, going, wow, this is beautiful. It's kind of like, it was a really nice feeling, and I felt so calm and sort of warm inside. And I started going, oh, what's happened? Because like, I haven't got more money in the bank. I haven't got a new job, not got a different relationship, haven't lost weight. It's kind of like, but everything looks different. It's kind of like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. And that was the start, of the dominoes falling. That was the start of the realization, of that, like, I'd been creating my own suffering for a lifetime, and it was like, I knew in that moment that the search was over, all that searching, all those years of going to events, of trying to find the next right thing. I just knew, it's kind of like, there's something in me that so deeply knew that I'd found, like myself, that I'd found that the journey was, the journey that I'd been trying to be going on, the destination that I've been trying to get to, was to me, was to see myself, and all that. And, that was a powerful moment. I remember that so clearly. And since then, that's kind of when everything has been unfolding, like particularly like with the creativity stuff. Probably about a year and a half after that, things had been changed. My life had changed profoundly, to the point where, it was like most days were like really content and free and calm. And, I had my human moments too, but like most of my life was spent, in a sort of pretty much joyful state. And I remember doing a course called Genius Catalyst about creativity. And we got given a scavenger hunt. We got given this scavenger hunt to go on, and that was my big insight about creativity, because like we got given these list of things. I was in LA, I was in Santa Monica, and there was this list of things put up on the board, like red paint, some NFL memorabilia, dark chocolate. I can't remember what they were, but it's kind of like I looked at these and I thought they looked like I was going to have to speak to people, like I'm going to have to, and like I didn't know how I could get them. So I sat there, and it's kind of like, and I picked these other two people and we went outside and we started talking, and I just had this huge realization that like, there's so much more potential, from the mind than what I think there is. There's so much more creative potential inside of us than what I think there is. Like me, the story of me, that the story of that victim, the story of that criminal or that drug addict that I used to carry around, depending on who I was talking to or how I used to talk of myself. It was kind of like there wasn't the same creativity in that, when I was coming from that place. But when I was really open to like, what could I see when I was quiet? What could I see? What was possible? And like I started looking at these list of things on a scavenger hunt, and I started thinking, well, that one we could do this and we could get that. We ended up walking down to the beach and finding this artist, and we got him to draw some NFL emblems, on a thing for the NFL memorabilia, and I think it was a fire hydrant or something we needed. I can't remember. So we got him to draw it, and it was like, it really just started me in that creative exploration of thinking, well, what else is possible? What else is possible when I look beyond the story of me? What else is possible when I'm not subscribed to being a victim of my past? What else is possible? And I started playing with that. I had more creative unfolding, experience from there. It was like, and that's when the podcast came about. It wasn't long after that, or maybe even slightly before that. I think it was just about that time, actually, thinking about the dates. The name of the podcast came to me before the podcast. It was kind of like, I don't know where I'd said it in a conversation, Misunderstandings of the Mind, and it was kind of like, oh, I love that name, like so much so that I love the name that I need to do something with it. It was such a powerful thing. And I thought, this is literally how it happened, right? You wouldn't believe the story, but I because I build websites and stuff, I wasn't worried about technology or anything. Yeah. So I built the website, put it, got the designs done and all the stuff that I can do easily within my company, put it together. And then I thought, well, who do I ask? Who do I want on a podcast? And I thought, well, I don't really know. So I asked my first mentor, who was Claire Shoots, who's just been amazing. I can't say enough good things about her. She's just been such a dominant, strong believer, that's in me, that's just made such a difference to my life. And so I said, we'll do a podcast, okay then. So we agreed to do it. And I'm turning up to this first podcast recording. I've got no clue about podcasts still at this point, but like I'm kind of knowing by now that like I just turn up and see what happens in life. And so I turned up and I said, well, what do we do? Like I'm asking the person who's the guest, what do we do for a podcast? Because I literally didn't know. I didn't care, but I didn't know either. And it's nice. She said, well, you say welcome and we have a conversation, and it was kind of like, that's how it went. That's literally how the first episode was made.
I think that's even just showing up sometimes, because we can have a lot of thinking about creating as well. It's like, what do we do? And we can even get caught in that. And again, just seeing that that's just thought, like we just need to show up and live in a way.
I remember at that point, I think writing questions down or something like that, thinking that it was all on me, and that was, part of the unfolding and realization of that was that was the only time, apart from when I was asked once by Jack Pransky to write questions down, which also worked better at a later date. But I realized that I could just show up to a recording of a podcast and like, however it went was pretty cool. And however, and it was like, I started playing with that. So like, I've had all these conversations with, George Pransky, Jack Pransky, Dickin, Michael, all the people who've been around a while. And just the thought that I could show up and have a conversation with those guys was a couple of years ago, it just wouldn't, there was just no way I could do that. What would I say? Oh my God, it'd be so difficult. They're so profound and so well spoken and they articulate the principles so well. And I can't do that. But it's kind of like, but now just kind of showing up and, one of my best favorite conversations was with Chip Chipman, and yeah, we do have a nice relationship. You know, I have spoke before and stuff, but like the feeling in the conversation that I had, you know, and literally just showing up and having that, and I love it. You know, I love doing my podcast conversations. They're such. I mean, I learn so much because I have to listen back to them, you know, in a quiet space, and I listen
Yeah.
back to, you know, a lot of the nuggets of wisdom that were in there, and
I get the same with this. It's like every Friday is just a lot of fun because it's just like a new person to explore with, and it's a lot of fun. And I think that's what I'm kind of hearing is this kind of playfulness and fun in creation as
mm,
well. Because it can seem like it has to be very serious, right?
yeah, it's funny. I had a conversation about seriousness today, and I don't know if you've heard before something Michael I think said to me, but he said, "I'm serious, but without the feeling of seriousness." You know, it's kind of like I'm serious about what I do, you know, but I don't have the feeling of seriousness. It's like I love what I do, I enjoy creating it, but it doesn't feel hard and it doesn't feel heavy and it doesn't feel like that typical like serious type feeling. It's more like um you know, just showing up and kind of seeing what happens. And I think one more point about that is like that, you know, we're always in the unknown in life. And it's like, we just live with the illusion that we're not, you know, for a long period of time until we realize that we are. I mean, it's kind of that simple, you know, it's like that. I thought that, you know, I was in control of my life and I was making whatever was happening happen, you know, and it was all down to me and on my shoulders.
Mm.
Now, the flip side of that is that that feels very heavy anyway to live that way. But when I realized that all life is unknown, and actually that's pretty cool, you know, because it's kind of like, you know, you can get up every day knowing that you're going to be taken care of and that everything's going to be okay, knowing that it's not your responsibility to do that. And
Yeah.
also with a curiosity, like, you know, well, what cool shit could happen today? I mean, it's that cool. And it's literally like, you know, I'm not saying it's like this because I have my human moments, but some days just getting up in the morning can be like Christmas because it's kind of like, well, who am I going to meet today? Or especially if I've got like meetings with new people or networking with people I've never met before, it's like, I'm excited to see where that's going to go. You know, if it'll go anywhere, if it'll be a new connection, a new nice conversation, something I've never explored or known before, you know, and that's pretty fun to me, you know. It's kind of like, and I can tell you that, you know, I missed it out of my story, but there was a period when I was, you know, in recovery, but not using drugs, but like I literally never went out. You know, I worked from home, I ordered online shopping, I did online dating, I built a gym in my home. It's kind of like I didn't want to go out because I hated people so much. You know, it's kind of I just couldn't stand them. It was like I had this idea that if only everyone else would do what I wanted, then I would be okay. You know, and it's like it's
Yeah.
just so the opposite of that now. You know, where I kind of love meeting new people.
Yeah. Yeah. And just going back to what you said there, I think as soon as we think we know, it kind of shuts down the possibility as well. It's kind of cool to just hang out where anything is possible. Yeah.
Yeah, like for me, you know, I was talking about this as well with a client yesterday that as soon as I think I know something, you know, it's kind of like then that's the limitation of my seeing, you know, it's kind of like that, and I'm limited by my own thinking, you know, limited by my own thinking. I think that I know something is as it is, you know, it's like then I'm not going to look any further. I just think that I know, and you know, especially when I'm suffering, you know, I think that I know, but you know, or I know it's this, but you know, it's kind of like, but I'm still suffering, you know, it's kind of like that, and I'm always saying that when I don't really know. I just think I know. You know, it's kind of like it's such a trap to get caught in that. You know, and it's kind of so freeing to realize. And I know when I'm, you know, when things are going good, when I'm in the river, you know, the river of insight. It's kind of like is that like I have more of that. I have more of not knowing. You know, I just feel kind of like okay not to know. I'm good to turn up to a call and go. You know what? I don't know the answer to that. It's kind of like I don't make it mean things about me. I feel quite free just to be in the exploration, you know, and to be okay with that.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's gorgeous. There's something else I was gonna share then, um, but it's gone. I don't know. um, yeah, I'm just talking about the because I know Michael Neill talks about creating the impossible, and I'm just reading his book at the moment, And it was funny because Ankush is coming on in a week or so, I think a couple of weeks, and to talk about money, and he was talking about like even saying creating the impossible makes it seem like it's impossible. So he was talking about it as doing the doable. And I kind of liked that, because it's like anything is possible, really, when we realize who we are, I guess.
Yeah.
That's
the big thing, isn't it? Then it's kind of like that. Well, if I'm not my story of me, I'm not a victim and I'm not a survivor. I mean, even a survivor story is a limitation. It's kind of like, even if I'm making myself up to be something that kind of sounds good, like to some people, that's still a limitation. It's kind of like, because I don't know what's possible in life. It's kind of like when I show up, with no clue, and I understand who I am, it's kind of like that. I'm not my thinking, I'm not those limitations, I'm not my made up story, I'm not a victim or a survivor. Then it's like, then what else is possible? I mean, that's what I was saying about life being exciting and fun, because it's like, no shit, it could be really cool, like even better than you could have imagined.
Yeah, and it's effortless in that way as well. There's no doing kind of involved, I guess. Yeah.
Definitely not. No, I mean, it does. I mean, that's when Michael said, I think the thing that I pirated was called The Path of Effortless Change. The original one that I pirated. And it's like, I used to have a real, I don't know what you would call it. Like a lack of understanding, I guess, is the right word, of the word effortless. That it kind of looked like it meant that I just sat back and did nothing, and that there was nothing to do. And I did get caught in that trap for a while, but I realized there's a lot of doing. I do. You don't have to do anything apart from what it occurs to you to do. And it's kind of like, that's very different to you don't have to do anything. Because like it occurs to me to do a lot of things. It just does in my wisdom. Like, it occurs to me to create shit and speak to people and do things and try shit and do all sorts of stuff. But it's like, it's very different to efforting, like, whereas I have to do something to get me to this place, because when I get to this place, then I'll be okay. It's kind of like, that's a different thing,
Yeah, I heard Dominic Scafidi, who I think is on this call actually, talking about intentional allowing the other day, and I quite liked that.
Yeah. What was that? Sorry, what was it talking about?
Intentional allowing.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, that was just another thing. I don't know if there's any questions. It might be a good time to open it up to any questions. We have lots of comments. Does anybody want to come on live? Okay, we have Michelle. I'm going to unmute you. There we go.
How scary being unmuted. Hi, Jason. It's lovely listening to you. Thank you. I've just wondered if there was one thing that you could say that I could pass on to my brother, who's suffered with a lot like you have. Just one thing that could get him to that moment you had on that bench, that enlightening moment. I just try to be there for him. Obviously, not making a big thing of everything that he's been through, but if there was just one thing that I could do to get him to that moment.
Well, let me share quickly. It's not one word, but it's like, it is one thing, unfortunately, I wish I had a more magic answer, because I really love, and I love people that are suffering. I don't love that they're suffering.
No.
But, I love, to be able to help people that are suffering like I did. And, when people ask me what was the most impactful thing, what made the most difference, was that somebody saw in me the truth of who I was. Somebody saw beyond my story. Somebody saw beyond my diagnosis.
Yeah.
And they never faltered. They never believed my shit. No matter how much I told them how insecure I was, how pathetic I was, how non-confident, how I couldn't create anything, how I was no good, how I was worse than everyone else, how this wouldn't work for me. They didn't believe that. They just was like, no, that's not the truth of who you are. That's a story, and it's kind of like, when someone else kept like seeing that in me, every time I spoke to them, I knew as well. It was like a feeling thing rather than a word. It's not like I believe in you, well done, pat on the back type thing.
Yeah.
It was like a real thing that touched me so deeply that like I actually started to believe what they saw in me more than I believed my own shit.
Yeah.
You know, and I will always tell you to this day that like that is the thing that like got me questioning myself, you know, so much. Like, how much of this shit that I tell myself about my daily experience is really true, because this person seems to be seeing something in me that like I kind of believe them, you know. They're so strongly believing in me and seeing the truth of who I am, that I'm believing them more than I'm believing my own thinking, you know.
Yeah.
And literally being around people, having one person that strongly believed in that was what made such a big difference for me.
Perfect. Thank you. That. Yeah. I'm just going to find him that person. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
I'm just going to mute you again. Is there anybody else who wants to come on and ask a question? You can. Paul. Okay, Paul. There we go.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, Paul.
How you doing? You kind of answered most of, well, my question to Michelle, so thank you for that. The second part of my question was, you just mentioned earlier, you feel like you can get up every day and, you know, in your words, some days could be like Christmas because you feel like you're being taken care of. How do you feel about that? What's your feelings around that? Where is that your inner wisdom, or do you feel more of a spiritual side to that? What's your thoughts around that?
Good question. And I think it's an individual kind of thing, you know, like that. I tried for years for, you know, when I went to 12-step meetings, like people would talk about spiritual awakening, and I would be like asking someone else or everyone else who I could, because I thought there was one right answer to knowing what a spiritual awakening was. And I heard so many different opinions, you know, on what that was. And I think for me, it's just like, it was just a combination of seeing how my life had truly unfolded and was unfolding, you know, like beyond my thinking about it. Because like my thinking about life was just that I was always a victim, or that I was always suffering, or that life, you know, was just against me, or everyone was against me. When I had that seeing through moment of seeing that I was making that up, you know, I was creating my experience with thought in the moment, and it like wasn't true, you know. When I had that experience of seeing that and being okay in the moment, that's when everything started to change. Because like I'm always okay, you know, when I'm here now, like in this moment present with you, you know, here, it's kind of like everything's always okay. And then I've always got the ability to start thinking about the future or the past or something like that, and nothing's okay in those times, because it's just completely uncertain, you know. It's kind of like I don't know what's going to happen in the future. And you know, I had a lot of realizations of seeing that I'm really good at knowing what to do in the moment without preparing for anything. You know, I'm really good at that. It like happens every time I show up for something, or something happens that I'm not expecting. I know what to do. I've got this responsive wisdom, you know, to the moment. But when I try and work out what to do in the future, imaginary future, you know, it's kind of like, then I'm not very good at that. I'm kind of like, I make all sorts of shit up, you know, about the future that isn't true. And then I try and work out what I might do about that if it happens. And I'm not very good at that. So I guess, you know, the thing is that, you know, being here and now, being present in the moment, not, you know, and seeing through the noise of my own thinking, just gives me a sense of being okay, you know, just kind of knowing that things are going to work out, and that things have always worked out despite my thinking, and that, you know, that's kind of how life looks like it works to me, you know. It's, I don't think this is the answer. I would like advise anyone, don't listen to me. This isn't the truth, or, you know, it's just my experience of it, you know. And I think it's something you've got to find your own sense of okayness with, you know.
So you'd say it's more like a belief in your inner resilience, your inner, I don't know, it's a belief in yourself that you've proved yourself so far that you're able to cope. You've just, I don't know, self-beliefs in your resilience, your wisdom, your capabilities, more than a spiritual kind of thing.
I would say it's more spiritual, because I think like with beliefs, you know, it's kind of like something that I'm having the opposite experience of, and I have to then convince myself that no, it's this way, it's this way, it's this way. And it's always like a you know, like I'm operating a function of the mind, you know, to do that. Whereas it's just more of a kind of knowing that that's how it works. And when I know that that's how it works, there doesn't feel like there's anything to believe in. It's just a knowing. It's like a deep sense of something that's within me that kind of, that's just how it works, you know?
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. Do we have any other questions? How are we doing for time? Yeah, there's probably, if anybody has another question, can't, let me just check if anybody's waving. You can always put up a message in the chat box if not. Thank you, we've got quite a few comments in the chat box, which is nice.
Just read them.
There's something Dana said earlier. She said, wow, I saw creativity as art as well until now. Actually, we are all creative. Yeah, that was a great point early on, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Monica, 10 years ago, to work in addiction snapshot.
Yeah, so I don't know if anybody else wants to come on. We have time for one more, but if not, then that might be a good place to end it, because we're right about on time, and I think that's quite nice to end with the reminder that we've got everything within us that we need. And yeah, I don't know, was there anything that you wanted to add, Jason, before we finish?
I think that's a great point. You know, it's like that, you know, I spent a lifetime thinking that what I needed was outside of myself, you know, that even for a while after I found this understanding, there were still subtleties in kind of like, I'd got this and in a way that my life had changed quite profoundly, but there were still parts of me that were searching. There were still parts of me that wanted to find something, you know. There was a real part of me that thought, if only I get the right relationship, you know, that things would be okay, or if only, you know, and it came very subtle to me, you know, and it was like, you know, it took a while before I kind of saw that, no, like, I'm really okay, you know, and it's like, I'm easily able to create the idea that I'm not, and from time to time that can still look compelling to me, you know, and that is the human experience is okay, you know. It's okay to fall asleep and wake up to this. It's okay to, you know, for it to look like something outside of you can make you feel better, you know, and then wake up to it, because that's what it is, you know. That's what the experience is. It's like being a spiritual being and then having a human experience, falling asleep to the fact that, you know, and forgetting to the truth of who we are, and that our thinking creates our experience, and then going into it for however long that lasts, and then waking up and going, oh shit, I'm doing it again, you know. It's kind of like, that's it, that it's, for me, you know, my experience has been that it's not all perfect, you know, and I'm kind of more, because I lived a life of jail and crime and stuff like that, I'm a bit more, I'm less articulate than many people, you know. It's kind of like, and it's took me a while of kind of getting to that place of just being able to show up and be me, you know, not trying to be someone else, you know, and speak in a certain way, but that being okay with that, and realizing that, you know, the impact comes from beyond the words, you know. It comes from that feeling. And I think I want to end with this. I was in a group the other day, and I think it was Bill Pettit that said, you know, words spoken from the heart touch the heart, you know. And it's kind of like, and I really like that, because it's not about what the words are, but it's about how they're spoken and where they come from, you know. And that was I guess another one of my big realizations, that it's not about the articulation or how you speak about this stuff, but it's about where you come from and what you know, the feeling that comes with it.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. What a lovely feeling to end with. That's great. Thanks so much, Jason. I really enjoyed your story, actually, and bits of it that I didn't know about. So yeah, lots of fun stuff in that, and lots of gems of wisdom. So thank you very much. I was going to invite, if anybody wants to hear more from you, where's the best place for them to look?
You can listen to podcasts, Misunderstandings of the Mind. There's loads of episodes on there. My website is wideworldcoaching.com.
Perfect. And is there anything specific you're working on that you're creating at the moment that you want to share? Or?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I'm really excited about. I've created a 3 principles based addiction treatment program, which I'm going to be launching soon. which is going to, well, I'm going to deliver it into institutions, but I'm also going to run an online version of it, which is going to be like a rehabilitation program, an immersive program over a month for people that are struggling. I'm also going to run a practitioners program as well, training people to work with addictions. It's not quite finished yet, but it's been in the creation for a while. So I'm kind of looking forward and excited to launching that.
That's very cool. Yeah, that's exciting. You'll have to share the links with us, and I'll pop them in the replay as well, because I pop all of those in there. So yeah, wonderful. That's amazing. Thank you very much. I'm just going to do some announcements about the next few speakers. So if you need to head off, then that's okay. Otherwise, you're welcome to stay. I'll just share who's coming up. But yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, next Friday the 12th of June, we have the wonderful Linda Pettit joining us. So she is married to Bill Pettit, so she's lovely. She's going to be exploring a really interesting topic of trauma. So some interesting synchronicities with tonight, and then the hidden gifts that we can find in grief, which again is a really interesting way of looking at it. She's called the talk Brilliance in the Dark. And she's sharing about the experience of suddenly losing her beloved husband at 47, and how that intensified her search for the answers in life, as she saw that moments of being dazzled by beauty, love and happiness were not entirely lost even in intense grief. And then she came across the principles and has been sharing that ever since. So yeah, that'll be a good one, on again one of those raw topics which is always really useful to explore. So we haven't really touched that much on grief so far, so that'd be a really beautiful one to discover. And then after that, we have the amazing Karen DeMarco, who's a lot of fun. She's here to talk about, she called it playing with ourselves. So she's talking about, again, embracing our humanness. So she's a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to that one. And then, as I mentioned, Anka, she's sharing on money without boundaries. So there's a lot of fun people coming up as well. We've got Marnix Poles as well, sharing about manifesting miracles through inspired action. So yeah, lots of interesting and inspiring and creative as well talks coming up. So lots of fun. Just as an invitation again, I've just my Self-Rediscovery School, I have got both of my programs now open for registration. They start in July. So again, that's about kind of continuing really diving into self-rediscovery. So we have the Foundations program, which is really about getting a foundational grounding in the principles to help us find freedom and kind of get to a place where we feel settled. Because for me, that was my experience when I first came across the principles, was kind of really grounding ourselves in that wisdom of who we really are. And I think from there, it's then kind of like a playground to kind of explore and have fun. So that's then the second program is Unravel. So that's kind of a deepening and more of an embracing of our humanness and who we kind of want to play as in life. So those are both starting in July. So that's very exciting. A bit like you, Jason, I've just we're in the first round of Foundations, which has been really amazing actually to see what's been going on in terms of people's transformation. It's just really beautiful. And again, a creation that just kind of flowed from wisdom. It wasn't something that I was like, right, I'm going to create this. It's like it just kind of unraveled from me playing with it and having fun, and really from creating the self-rediscovery conversations as well, because it's just fun to kind of extend that exploration. So yeah, excited about those. And also you're speaking at 3P UK as well, aren't you? And I'm speaking as well at 3P UK this weekend, so Sunday to Tuesday. So that's very exciting as well. So if anybody is interested, there are tickets for 3P UK. I think it's about £100. There's all these amazing Three Principles speakers lined up. So many of whom have probably been on both of our podcasts and things. So yeah, it's going to be a fun weekend, and yeah, lots of excitement there. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. Again, I'm always in the Self-Rediscovery community group, so I'm hanging out there generally quite a lot. And other than that, thank you for joining us. And yeah, thank you again, Jason. It was really fun and really nice to hear your journey. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Robin. Thank you.
Lots of love. Mwah.
See you later, guys.
Thanks.